Welcome back to Matt's Money Matters. In this edition, we're going back in time to 1869, the original Black Friday. Three investors, one love of gold, and an awkwardly compromised US president. Together, it caused a financial crisis. This is the story about how a small group of guys schemed their way into cornering the New York gold market. Because gold was so crucial to international trade, changes in the price could have a significant impact. And what the villains in this story had in mind was going to have a devastating impact. In our story of how these three guys and their mates cornered the gold market and caused a financial crisis, we need to do a bit of background. In the time after the US Civil War, the federal government of the United States had borrowed a huge amount of money, and they'd removed themselves from the gold standard, which was a system where the value of their currency, their notes and their coins, was pegged to gold. Over the period of about 30 years, the price of an ounce of gold doubled. And what that effectively tells you is that the value of the notes and coins in people's wallets had halved. The price of everything had gone up, there was an inflation, and people weren't happy about it. The message here is that if the value of your notes and coins fall, then the price of everything you use to buy with them goes up. And that's called inflation. Now, the punters wanted this gold standard back, so in 1866, Congress passed the Contraction Act, and they cut the supply of notes and coins by about 20% over 2 years. Horrible disaster. It did the opposite. It caused a deflation, which usually comes with unemployment and problems for farmers, who were a big part of the economy back then. President Ulysses S. Grant had a different idea when he came to office in 1867. He decided to keep the level of coins and notes basically stable for a decade and let the economy grow and catch up. The important thing to understand is that back then, gold was critical to the economy. All international transactions, whether it be trade or investment, involving more than one currency would be balanced out using gold. So anybody trading, exporting, would need to loan or buy or sell gold in order to complete the transaction. At this point, we can introduce Jay Gould and Jim Fisk, railway tycoons who had a bright idea. They developed a scheme to control the gold market in New York, but they had a big problem. President Grant had a stable monetary policy, which in modern terms refers usually to interest rates, but you can think of it back then as being about the amount of gold that he was selling in order to influence fluctuations in the currency. Grant thought there was a bubble, so he wanted a contractionary policy. It's like if you're in a car and you want to keep your foot on the brake so that it doesn't speed out of control. Gould embarked on a campaign to convince Grant to change his mind, and he enlisted a lot of business people to pursue it. The argument was that a lower valued currency would make their exports more competitive internationally, which would particularly benefit farmers. And that would mean in Grant's case that he would have to stop selling gold. And here's where it got thoroughly awkward for President Grant. Gould got his brother-in-law, Abel Corbin, involved in the scheme. Corbin was married to Grant's sister, so Gould gave him $2 million and asked him to act as an insider and put pressure on the president to change his mind. The two of them arranged for a mate to be installed high up in the Treasury in New York to let them know in advance of any gold sales, because that would put a massive dent in their plan. Jim Fisk, Gould's co-conspirator, wrote to the president saying that American farmers would not be competitive in export markets at the current currency conversion rate. He said, "I talked with General Grant on the subject to convince him that his policy was one that would bring destruction on us all." Big words. Didn't work though. So they moved to Plan B, which was to make everybody think that Grant had changed his policy, because that would influence people's behavior in gold markets. How did they do this? This is a meme. I'm not making it up. They wrote an article and got it published in the New York Times, and they claimed it was from someone with an intimate knowledge of how the president thinks. Some things never change. Now, to give credit to the New York Times, the financial editor read the article and he thought something was up, so they toned it down a little bit. But eventually this pressure worked and it led President Grant to change his mind. Temporarily at least, they paused gold sales because it was the crop harvesting season. They wanted to make their farmers competitive in overseas markets, so that argument worked. Gould and Fisk stockpiled gold from August through September. They had support from the 10th National Bank and Erie Railroad, which were their business interests. They used those to finance the transactions. And so the gold price went up to $141. Now that's not per ounce, it's for a bizarre unit called $100 of gold specie or something. It doesn't matter what that means, but the important point was that gold price had gone up. At one stage, these guys had options to buy more gold than there was in circulation in the entirety of New York. And that meant they would have phenomenal power to drive up the price, with massive consequences for everybody else. With the gold price rocketing as a result of their actions, other businesses started to come under pressure. Some people were short selling gold, which means they would borrow some gold and sell it, wait for the price to fall, and then buy it back to pay back their loan. They were getting smashed, and they were not happy. They wanted to drive down the price and wanted to lobby the president to take action. The conspirators got nervous. They had put in a phenomenal amount of work, which I largely glossed over, to convince Grant to stop selling gold, and a turnaround in the policy would mean they would lose out big time. These guys had bought lots of gold and lots of options to buy more gold if the price was at a certain level. If Grant changed his policy and started selling gold again, there'd be more gold, the price would fall, and they would be screwed. So at this point, Corbin wrote to President Grant and said, "Hey mate, hope you're not planning to change your gold policy again anytime soon, hey?" But he had overplayed his hand. Corbin had the letter delivered via Gould's servant, and President Grant was already becoming aware of rumours that Fisk and Gould were up to something. And at this point, he worked out what was going on, and President Grant was pissed. So things had reached a cliffhanger. President Grant was in a very awkward situation because his brother-in-law and his brother-in-law's mates had convinced him to change policy. But Gould and Fisk weren't done yet. All of the pieces were in place, and now was the time for their plan. Now was the time for them to act, before it was too late. So what happened? How much damage was done? And what did President Grant do in response? Find out in the next episode of Matt's Money Matters.